You know that really strange feeling you can sometimes get, like you're sort of watching yourself from outside, a bit detached?
Yeah, that out-of-body sensation. OBEs.
Exactly. Out-of-body experiences. Well, today we're diving deep into that. You've shared some, frankly, fascinating academic material with us,
Right. A real mix of sources, neurobiology, consciousness research, even studies on psychoactive substances.
which sounds diverse, but you're saying the connections are actually pretty revealing for OBEs.
Incredibly revealing, yeah. The intersections are where things get interesting.
Okay, so our mission here is to really pull out the key insights from this research. What does the science currently suggest about how and why these experiences might happen?
That's the goal.
And just to be clear up front, for you listening, we're not aiming to prove or disprove if consciousness actually leaves the body.
No, that's not the focus here.
Instead, we're looking at the main neuropsychological theories, how scientists are trying to explain OBEs by looking at brain function.
So the big question guiding us is, how can we understand the mechanisms behind OBEs by looking at disruptions in, let's say, normal brain function, especially thinking about altered states like those induced by psychoactives?
Got it. Okay, so where do we start? The research you provided seems to have a pretty clear stance on the reality of OBEs.
It does. The prevailing view, the academic consensus based on this material, is that OBEs are likely not a literal separation of consciousness from the body.
Okay, right. That's a fundamental starting point. So if it's not that, what are researchers grappling with?
Well, it throws up some big challenges. The sources highlight three major tasks, really.
Okay, what's the first?
First, you need to explain how OBEs actually happen across all the different ways they get induced, near death, sleep, drugs, you name it. And what are the neurological mechanisms? Is there something common?
Makes sense. And the second?
The second is about people. Why do some individuals have an OBE in a certain situation, say during a seizure, like in that Grayson study,
Yeah, I saw that reference.
while others in the exact same boat don't? There's clearly an individual difference factor, some predisposition maybe.
Or different brain states at the time.
Could be. And that leads to the third task. Why does the same person have an OBE sometimes but not others, even if the physiological state seems identical?
Right. Consistency or lack thereof.
Exactly. And the sources suggest that, well, existing theories have kind of struggled to tick all those boxes comprehensively.
So the thinking is moving towards brain networks, not just isolated spots.
Precisely. The idea is that OBEs aren't just one little circuit glitching. It's more likely about disruptions across multiple brain areas, crucially, within a large-scale brain network.
A network whose function can be easily tweaked by different factors.
Yeah, physiological factors, psychological ones. It's like the whole communication system gets temporarily rerouted.
Okay, this is where, for me, it gets really interesting. The link to psychedelics.
Ah, yes. There's been a huge resurgence in research there.
And the sources you shared propose that studying how these substances affect the brain and the subjective experiences they cause could give us major clues about OBEs.
Absolutely. They might be a key to unlocking how these experiences get induced and sort of formed in the brain.
What kind of substances are we talking about? The list seemed quite broad.
It is. Ketamine is a big one. Psilocybin, DMT, MDMA, even THC sometimes. And then psychoactive plants like Salvia divinorum or ayahuasca.
And some induce OBEs more readily than others.
Apparently so, yeah. Which hints that there might be specific neurochemical pathways involved, not just a general effect.
How are these generally classified as psychedelics?
Broadly, yes. The source material uses that Grinspoon and Buckler definition from '98, basically substances that change thought, mood, perception.
Without causing major physical problems or addiction. Right?
Exactly. No delirium, no major memory loss generally. That selective alteration of experience is what makes them useful research tools.
Useful for probing consciousness itself.
Right, and there's that Timmerman study from 2018 mentioned in the source. It showed DMT significantly boosted scores on the near-death experience scale.
Wow. So DMT triggers experiences very similar to NDEs.
Very similar, according to that scale. And they also found a big overlap between those DMT-induced NDEs and what are called mystical type experiences.
Suggesting maybe a common underlying brain mechanism for these intense states.
It points that way. And psychologically, these psychedelic experiences often touch on themes of death, dying.
Like ego death. I've heard that term.
Exactly. That feeling of the self-dissolving, which people sometimes liken to actual death. And OBEs are commonly reported with ayahuasca, for instance, as Rob noted back in 2002.
So what's happening in the brain? What are the neuropharmacological mechanisms proposed for how these substances might trigger OBEs?
The general idea is neurotransmitter receptor hyperactivation. Basically, these drugs really ramp up activity at certain receptor sites.
But it varies between drugs.
Definitely. Which receptors, how much they're activated, that differs. But historically, the focus for classic psychedelics like psilocybin and DMT, the tryptamines, was their strong effect on serotonin 5-HT2A receptors, particularly in the cortex.
Okay, 5-HT2A receptors in the cortex. And overactivating these is thought to disrupt certain brain circuits. These corticostriato-thalamocortical loops. That sounds complex.
It is complex but crucial. Think of those loops as major information highways in the brain, involving filtering and relaying sensory and cognitive info. The thalamus acts like a central gatekeeper.
Right.
The hypothesis is that hitting those 5-HT2A receptors too hard might mess with the thalamus's gating function.
So information doesn't get filtered or relayed properly,
Yeah.
leading to weird perceptions.
Potentially, yes. Aberrant perceptions, maybe that feeling of detachment, like the brain's switchboard operator gets temporarily overwhelmed or scrambled.
But the sources mentioned other mechanisms too, something about glutamate.
Yeah, it's not just serotonin. Some research suggests psychedelics might cause an overload of internal information processing by promoting glutamate release, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter.
Okay.
And other work points to enhancing glutamate transmission through other receptor types, like non-NMDA receptors, especially in the frontal cortex. It's complicated.
So the picture is definitely more nuanced than just it's all serotonin 5-HT2A.
Much more nuanced. That Ray study from 2010 really drove this home. It looked at a wide range of psychedelics against many different brain targets, receptors, transporters, ion channels.
And found they hit more targets than expected.
Way more. It suggests the unique effects of each drug likely come from its specific fingerprint of interactions across multiple receptor systems, not just one or two.
Okay, that complexity leads us nicely into another big concept, brain entropy.
Yes, this is really central to a lot of modern thinking about consciousness and altered states. The work by Carhart-Harris and others is key here.
They proposed that normal waking consciousness operates in a specific zone of entropy. How should we understand entropy here?
Think of it like the level of randomness or unpredictability in the brain's electrical activity. For normal consciousness, you need a balance, not too rigidly ordered, but not completely chaotic either, a kind of critical zone.
A sweet spot.
Sort of, yeah. And the idea is that psychedelics can push brain activity out of that normal critical zone.
Towards more order or more disorder.
Either, potentially, depending on the drug and context. But by shifting the brain's operating point, they fundamentally change perception and subjective experience. Our source even had that diagram showing the spectrum.
Right. And within that critical or near critical zone, what happens to our experience?
The hypothesis is that our thinking and feeling become, well, more fluid. Less constrained, more easily influenced by subconscious stuff, emotions, anxieties, wishes, memories.
Usual mental barriers are lowered.
That's the idea. The gates are opened wider, so to speak.
So how does this model explain OBEs specifically?
The theory suggests an OBE happens when there's a significant shift in brain entropy, moving consciousness out of its normal waking range and into this more critical, less constrained state.
And in that state, the subconscious has more sway.
Exactly. Leading to these unusual perceptions, the feeling of detachment, maybe even the specific content of the OBE being shaped by those underlying thoughts and feelings.
Fascinating. And the source connects this entropy idea back to older theories about the brain acting as a filter.
Yes, it brings in Henri Bergson's idea from way back. He suggested the brain's main job is actually to limit consciousness, to filter out the overwhelming flood of potential memories and sensations so we can focus and act.
The reducing valve idea that Aldous Huxley picked up on for psychedelics.
Precisely. Huxley argued that substances like mescaline essentially bypass or open up this reducing valve, letting in a much wider reality, sometimes overwhelming.
So applying that language here, an OBE could be seen as the brain's filtering, reducing valve shifting.
Which impacts brain entropy, pushes it into that critical zone.
And leads to this altered state where experience is biased by the subconscious and maybe feels like accessing things usually filtered out.
That's the conceptual link. This altered filtering state, this shift in entropy, could create the subjective feeling of detachment or accessing unusual information. Again, the emphasis is on the subjective experience.
Okay, let's bring in another key player. The default mode network, the DMN.
Right, the DMN. It keeps coming up in discussions of consciousness, self-awareness, and altered states.
What exactly is it?
It's a large-scale network of brain regions that's most active when we're sort of inwardly focused, mind-wandering, thinking about ourselves, remembering the past, planning the future, not when we're focused on an external task.
And it's considered pretty fundamental for our normal sense of self.
Very fundamental. It provides that baseline sense of continuous self, our internal narrative.
What are the main parts of the DMN we should know about?
There's a core set of midline structures: medial prefrontal cortex, posterior cingulate cortex. Then there are subsystems, like one involving the dorsal medial prefrontal cortex and another involving the medial temporal lobe that includes the hippocampus and parahippocampus.
And those medial temporal lobe structures, the hippocampus and parahippocampus, seem particularly important for this discussion.
They do. They're heavily involved in memory, obviously, but also in integrating sensory information and our sense of being located in space, our embodied self. The parahippocampus especially seems to link that subsystem to the rest of the DMN, particularly when our focus is internal.
So, how do psychoactive drugs affect this crucial network, and how does that link back to OBEs?
This is where Carhart-Harris's research, again, is really informative. Using psilocybin, they found reduced connectivity, less synchronized activity between key DMN hubs, like the medial prefrontal cortex and the posterior cingulate cortex.
Less talking between those core regions.
Exactly. They describe this as leading to unconstrained cognition. The usual tight organization of the DMN loosens up.
Unconstrained cognition. That really paints a picture.
Doesn't it? They also found less coupling between the DMN and the hippocampus. But, intriguingly, more activity and less synchronized activity within the hippocampus itself.
So the hippocampus goes a bit rogue.
Kind of. It seems to function more independently, which is suggested could lead to unusual memory activations or perceptions, things similar to what's seen in psychosis or REM sleep.
And it's not just psilocybin doing this. Other drugs show similar DMN effects.
That's right. Ayahuasca studies show increased activity in some frontal areas, but decreased activity in the core DMN. Ketamine, LSD, similar findings of reduced DMN activity or connectivity.
It seems like a consistent pattern.
It does. And it fits with earlier ideas, like Crystal's proposal that smooth integrated activity across the cortex is needed for normal experience, and disrupting that connectivity could lead to dissociation.
So putting it together, the theory suggests OBEs might stem from changes in that filter valve system, causing entropy shifts, which then functionally decouple the DMN.
That's the emerging framework. This DMN decoupling, especially involving regions like the parahippocampus, hippocampus, and another key area, the temporoparietal junction, or TPJ.
Oh, yes, the TPJ.
It seems central to the dissociation and the sometimes hallucinatory aspects of OBEs. It's like the brain's map of self in space gets temporarily scrambled.
Let's zoom in on those specific regions a bit more. The parahippocampus and hippocampus involved in spatial mapping and memory, you said.
Correct. How we know where we are, how we remember places and events, crucial stuff.
And the TPJ, the temporoparietal junction, what's its role?
The TPJ is fascinating. It's implicated in things like distinguishing self from other, understanding intentions, but also in stranger phenomena like hallucinatory experiences, including that eerie feeling of someone else being present when they're not.
And it's directly linked to the feeling of being outside the body.
Very strongly. Studies using TMS transcranial magnetic stimulation to stimulate or disrupt the TPJ have actually induced bodily distortions and feelings, very much like OBEs.
Wow. Directly triggering parts of the experience.
Yeah. Disrupting the TPJ seems to blur the line between your own body and the outside world. And there was that fMRI study on someone who could induce OBEs voluntarily.
Right, I remember reading about that.
Their TPJ lit up significantly during the experience, matching findings from spontaneous OBEs and related phenomena like autoscopy, seeing your own body from the outside.
That's pretty compelling evidence for the TPJ's role. Now, the sources also connect DMN disruption to states that often coincide with OBEs, sleep, meditation, hypnosis.
Exactly. More converging evidence. We see decreased DMN connectivity as we fall asleep, during deep sleep, even under light sedation.
And being sleepy during the day is linked to lower DMN connectivity too.
Yes. And then there's local sleep, the idea that parts of the brain can essentially be asleep while you're awake. That could potentially play a role, especially since many OBEs are reported starting from sleep or near sleep states.
What about meditation?
Lots of research there shows reduced DMN activity during meditation. And experienced meditators often show lower baseline DMN activity even when they're not meditating. It seems to be a lasting effect of the practice.
A different default mode, maybe.
Perhaps, and hypnosis.
The research is a bit thinner there, but what exists suggests lower DMN connectivity during hypnosis, potentially linked to deeper trance and dissociation. Highly hypnotizable people might also have lower DMN activity generally. So, across the board, states conducive to OBEs seem linked to altered DMN function. But the big question remains. How does the brain come to accept these bizarre perceptions as real?
Right. Why does it feel like reality? The source draws a really strong parallel with dreaming.
Okay. We accept crazy things in dreams all the time.
Exactly. And we know dreams, sleep, OBEs, and the DMN are all interconnected. When we dream, even impossible scenarios feel totally real in the moment.
Which brain areas drive dreaming?
Key areas include the occipitotemporoparietal junction, that's for the perceptual stuff, the sights and sounds, and also the ventral medial prefrontal cortex, linked to motivation and reward. Dopamine pathways there seem crucial for dreaming to even happen.
And during dreaming, the brain's activity pattern shifts significantly from waking life.
Massively. Activity decreases in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the part involved in logic, planning, self-awareness, reality testing.
The critical thinking part goes offline.
Largely, yes. And activity ramps up in those perceptual processing areas in the back of the brain. Plus, motor output is blocked, thankfully.
So we don't act out our dreams.
Right. So the hypothesis for OBEs is similar. A shift away from motor intentional processing towards perceptual processing, driven by those entropy changes and DMN decoupling.
And if that critical thinking part, the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and maybe self-monitoring systems in the frontal lobe are also dampened down enough,
then the unusual perceptual experience generated isn't subjected to the usual reality checks. It gets accepted as real by the brain.
Okay, this brings us back to the filter idea, but now at the neurochemical level. What systems might make up this reducing valve?
Well, Smithies pointed to the NMDA system. Luke suggested serotonin. But the source proposes thinking bigger. The entire neurochemical system, the complex interplay of all these neurotransmitters, likely acts as the filter or valve.
And it ranks 6 key systems based on how well drugs affecting them mimic NDEs.
Yes, using that Marshall et al. Study. Top of the list are glutamate and GABA, the main excitatory and inhibitory duo. Their balance is crucial. Disrupting it, especially NMDA receptors, like with ketamine, causes depersonalization, dissociation, core OBE stuff. They're also tied to brain entropy and DMN function.
Makes sense. What's next?
Opioids, norepinephrine, epinephrine, think stress response, NE, anti-stress endogenous opioids. The fact that salvia, a kappa opioid agonist, causes NDE-like states is telling. Opioid system problems are also linked to dissociation.
Okay, then serotonin, acetylcholine, dopamine.
Serotonin's obvious, given psychedelics hitting its receptors, though the exact role in dissociation is still debated. Acetylcholine is vital for cognition, and drugs blocking it cause NDE-like delirium. Dopamine is huge for reward, motivation, but also hallucinations, the all-dopamine hypothesis. It's also linked to dreaming and schizotypal traits, which themselves correlate with OBEs.
It seems like almost all the major neurotransmitter systems could potentially play a role in tweaking this filter.
It suggests a very complex interplay. The source even includes the stress hormone axis, CRH, ACTH, cortisol as the 6th system. Psychedelics affect cortisol. High cortisol is linked to dissociation, anxiety, depression, and those conditions are often comorbid with dissociative experiences.
Wow, so it's truly systemic effect potentially. This leads to the grand synthesis, the Filter-Valve-Entropic-Brain-Decoupling, or FVEBD theory.
That's the proposed name, yeah. It ties it all together. Changes in the neurochemical filter valve system cause shifts in brain entropy, pushing the brain towards criticality, which then leads to DMN decoupling, and that shift from motor cognitive dominance to perceptual dominance.
And if reality testing is offline, the experience feels real?
That's the essence of it, an OBE as the end result of that cascade. The theory also incorporates the idea that subconscious needs or motivations can influence the content of the experience. It's sort of wakeful dream.
But the source acknowledges limitations, right? It's not a closed case.
Absolutely not. It relies on the filter concept, which might be too simple. The entropy model doesn't explain specific conscious content perfectly. Generalizing from drug states is always tricky, and we need more direct evidence of DMN decoupling during spontaneous OBEs.
But it's testable. That's the key.
Definitely. It points towards using fMRI, EEG, MEG during OBEs induced or natural to actually measure entropy and DMN coupling, and correlating those measures with all the physiological and psychological factors we've discussed.
So how does this FVEBD framework tackle those three big challenges for OBE research we started with?
Well, for task 1, explaining OBEs across different states, FVEBD offers a common underlying pathway. Filter changes, entropy shifts, DMN decoupling. It provides a potential unifying neurological basis.
Okay. Task 2, why some people but not others?
FVEBD suggests this comes down to individual differences, variations in baseline DMN connectivity, sensitivity to disruption, maybe physiological factors like sleep debt, body position, even stacking up different DMN disrupting states, plus psychological factors, readiness to dissociate, absorption ability, expectations.
Set and setting, almost.
Very much so. And task 3, why sometimes, but not others for the same person.
That fluctuating interplay.
Exactly. All those physiological and psychological factors aren't fixed. They change day to day, moment to moment. So whether the conditions align for DMN decoupling and an OBE on any given occasion is variable.
It paints a picture of DMN decoupling as the central hub, causing ripples through the brain. And the wakeful dream idea helps explain the weird content.
Yeah, like seeing lights or scenes that aren't there, potentially bubbling up from the subconscious when the usual filters and constraints are off.
So this neuropsychological view frames OBEs as, fundamentally, brain events. Complex ones, influenced by mind and body, but brain events nonetheless.
That's the direction the research points. It moves away from paranormal explanations towards neurological ones, shaped by physiology and psychology, and it opens up tons of new research questions.
Like needing to systematically survey OBEs about things like depression, anxiety, body position, intention, even vestibular issues.
Precisely. All those factors highlighted by the theory need more detailed investigation.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, the academic research you shared strongly points towards OBEs as altered states of consciousness. They seem to arise from disruptions in brain function, specifically involving shifts in brain entropy and, crucially, the decoupling of the default mode network.
And these brain changes can be influenced by a whole host of things. Physiology, psychology, and yes, psychoactive substances offer a powerful window into these mechanisms.
It's clearly complex, and research is ongoing.
Definitely still lots to learn.
Which leaves a really interesting thought for you, the listener. If OBEs are like a wakeful dream, rooted in brain states and shaped by our inner world, what does understanding that tell us about consciousness itself? About how your brain constructs your reality every day, even when you feel perfectly grounded? Something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.